Hi, this is Bill Prater, and welcome to the Business Builders Show, where we feature champions in their respective industries from all over the world. Our mission is to provide you with timely, provocative, and actionable resources that will inspire, promote, and accelerate your quest for business excellence. Today, we're going to find out how to grow your leadership wisdom with Gregory Stebbins. Now, Gregory has a career spanning over 4 decades and has become a global authority on wise leadership, transcendent leadership, and loving leadership, updating how we choose to lead in the modern era. Leaders who not only possess the business acumen to navigate the complexities of the corporate world, but also have the inner wisdom and awareness to inspire and engage their team on a profound level. That's precisely what Greg aims to cultivate through his groundbreaking program called Journey to Wise Leadership. Greg brings to the table a unique blend of senior business leadership experience and an in-depth understanding of the intricate human dynamics which shape the workplace. With multiple articles and books, he's become a sought-after expert in the field and loves to share his insights with organizations across the globe, and most importantly, agreed to become a guest on the Business Builder Show. Greg, it's great to have you here, sir.
Nice to be here. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Good, likewise. Let's start out by me asking you, Greg, who do you serve?
I serve the individual leaders who are growing and looking for more dynamic ways to interact with their people and help them grow.
So what problems do you typically see in these individuals, Greg, that you're able to solve flawlessly?
It depends on the level of leadership that they're at. So if they're an emerging leader or they're just beginning, they're probably trying to run all the principles they learned in their MBA program and finding not many of them work in the real world. They're great theory, but they don't have the human skills necessary. So that's one set. We work on helping them start developing their inner wisdom to find out what they're good at. And so for leadership, it's a lot that has to do with their identity, which is made up of their beliefs, their values, and their attitudes. But most young people have never looked at those. And certainly very few college programs have them look at them. Then the other set is senior leaders who are just transitioning out of running major corporations. And they're at that point, they say, what's next? The first question I ask them is, what makes your heart sing? And most of them don't have an answer to that because they've never looked at that. So we spend a lot of time looking at that.
Interesting. Greg, maybe I'm thinking, because you've got these 2 avatars you just described, so maybe you could give us a short case study for each example, and that would help our listeners understand how you go about solving the problems you've identified.
Let's look at a senior leader first. It was a senior leader I was working with who was changing the direction of this company. He had a whole new strategic plan. He had almost his entire leadership team bought off on it, except the CFO was totally against it. And the CFO was doing unconscious bias and was messing things up. So in a meeting with the senior leader, I looked at him and said, as a CEO, you can fire this guy. And he looked at me and he said, no, I can't. So why not? So because he's a lifelong friend, I don't want to do that to him. I said, oh, great. So you have a perfect opportunity here. Your perfect opportunity is go find him a job in an environment where he's going to thrive. And that gives you an opening to bring somebody in that's going to be in alignment. And that's what he did. He's still friends with his old CFO. CFO loves the new company he's working with. And it involved a lot of phone calls on the part of the CEO to get this job for the CFO. But he was a lifelong friend, so he did it. So that's a senior leader, and he really needed to know what he could do, and he couldn't think outside the box, which is what we did for him. Junior leaders, a lot of them is just understanding what their beliefs about leadership are And are those beliefs in alignment with what they want to do and where they want to go? In about 50% of the cases, they're not. So I take them through a process of self-introspection, which is very different from what most people do, which is self-inquisition. They beat themselves up. That doesn't do any good. And then we take them into self-reflection and help them develop their intuitive insight. And that intuitive insight is about them as an individual, not about the company, not about their job, but them. Who are they and what do they want to do? So a lot of this is just internal work with the person.
Okay, that's very good. Thanks for giving us both of those. Now, I've been a coach consultant for 25 years. You've been a similar space for a long time. There's lots and lots of competition. How, Greg, are you different from your competition? What sets you apart from them?
For most of the competition, they have not really done a very thorough and deep job on wisdom development. So there's two aspects. One is really understanding the history of wisdom and development, and that goes back to before the Romans and before the Greeks. And then the other is, what are they doing for their personal development? So I've had an ongoing meditation process for over 50 years. So I have some insights about the complexities of human behavior because I've gone through them myself. So when they show up in a coaching call, it's like, it's not a good or bad thing. It's, oh, you're experiencing this. And they go, yeah, I am. How'd you know that? I said, because I have too. And here's some ways to solve that. Mostly wisdom, Bill, is built on our experiences and what we have learned from our experiences. And I find that a lot of senior leaders just have experiences but never learn anything from them. So they get repeating experience and repeating experience. Younger leaders are more open to change. So having them look at the experience that they've had, learn from it, and make a direction change is a lot easier. So I actually have more fun working with emerging leaders.
That's very well articulated. Listeners, you won't know that Greg fired up his intuitive self and helped me start up my computer remotely today. So yes, mediation does help develop wisdom, instincts, all of that sort of thing. Hey, Greg, you're a coach consultant type of guy, and so you've got a business of your own. Our listeners would like to know what your key milestones were as you've built your business, and then most importantly, what lessons did you learn from the successes and the failures along the way?
Mine goes back to a very early age. When I was about 6 years old, I was at a summer camp. This is 20 acres of land, 2 water fountains. So I convinced my mom to buy me a canteen. And so the bigger kids started pestering me for drinks of water because they didn't want to stand in line at the water fountain. And I said, okay, a nickel a swallow. Sometimes they drain the canteen, give me my nickel, but I could always go fill up my canteen again. So that was, first step was learning how to sell. I didn't learn packaging though, because we all buy bottled water. Then I got my first rejection. A camp counselor came to me, confiscated my canteen. And when my mom came to pick me up, he gave her the canteen and said, don't ever let him bring this back again. What he's doing is wrong and bad. So, yeah, so I had to deal with that while I was going through door to door as a teenager, or door to door as a young kid, and then as a teenager, and then had various sales jobs and then sales management jobs, ending in commercial real estate in Beverly Hills, where I learned a lot about a cultural background and how that affected negotiation. For example, I had a middle-aged woman working for the company, and most of the women at that time emulated male suits. They had the dressy suit and then a red bow.
Okay, sure, I remember.
Yeah, so she was doing that too and wasn't having any success. So I said, what I'm going to say is very misogynistic. so please forgive me in advance. I said, you have an environment where your husband's making a significant amount of money. I would switch to Armani because you're dealing with mostly young ethnic characters buying commercial real estate, and they love negotiating with each other. But the ethnic process is a matriarchal society. It's not a patriarchal society. So you're missing out the advantage of that. And she looked at me like I just told her to shove her head in the toilet. But she went out, she did that.
Okay.
And 2 weeks later, she came back, closed the door, and said, I owe you an apology. You were right. I said, tell me about it. He said, I was negotiating with these two young studs who were fighting over a quarter of basis point in the negotiation. And they both looked at me, and I looked at them and said, boys, this is what we're going to do. And they did it. I said, of course they did it, because you represented their surrogate mother. And she goes, I will never doubt you again, Craig. She was embarrassed and she was thrilled because the commission she earned off that job more than equaled her husband's salary.
She could buy a few more suits.
She could buy a few more suits, and she looked good in Armani. She was very powerful. And as her confidence grew, became more. She ended up being a top producer in the office. Nobody could understand why, because she wasn't playing the game. She was playing the game, just not their game. She was playing a game that was appropriate for her clients.
That's a nice story. You got some more of those?
Just what I've gone through, which I imagine you've gone through in terms of learning to market myself. Before there was social networks and all these opportunities to push your message out, I figured out that postcard campaigns were the best. And probably the best postcard campaign I did was what I call the Great Baby Campaign. That showed the front of the postcard had a baby in distress with just the words, frustrating, isn't it? And then the message was on the back of the postcard. So I talked about your salespeople are doing great, but they're not building relationships, and suddenly their client disappears. Frustrating, isn't it? And I had about 6 or 7 of these. And I did a campaign. This was all in Southern California. I sent out about 5,000 postcards. And I probably got 100 clients from it.
So that's pretty good.
Yeah. A typical postcard campaign back then was 2% return. Right. Mine was much better than that. I didn't get everybody, but I got calls. And one call I got, I would always research who I was going to talk to before I picked up the phone and called them.
Okay.
There was one guy who was a VP of sales. And as I did my research, I found out he had a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering. And so when I called him back, the tone of his voice sounded like he would rather be in a dentist office getting a root canal than talk to me. So I finally said, can I ask you a personal question? He goes, yeah. So what made you transition from chemical engineering to sales? There's a pause, and he goes, how did you know that? I said, I just did my homework. But I'm happy to tell you, but I'll do it face to face. He said, okay, you got your appointment. So we scheduled an appointment, and I walked in, and he said, you Googled me. This was the early days of Google. I said, yeah, I did, but what I couldn't figure out is whether you went to Cal Poly Pomona or Cal State Long Beach, because those are the only two schools in California that offer a degree in chemical engineering. He gets this big smile on his face. I graduated from Cal State Long Beach, but I sit on the engineering review board at Cal Poly Pomona. And then he referred me down to the guy that was going to make the decision. The appointment didn't go so great because there was another person who's his training advisor who said, this guy has no experience doing our product. And I sent the guy an email saying, she's absolutely right. I have no experience doing your product. I have no experience selling military helicopters. I have no experience doing this. I have no experience. Yet Fortune 500 companies have always allowed me to work with their salespeople to help them build relationships with their clients, which is what we're talking about. And then it was just design a program and deliver it, which I delivered throughout the United States and Europe. So you got to find out what your customers really want and you got to give it to them. Something.
Yes. Oh, yes, indeed. Indeed, I do. Now, what's holding you back right now, do you think, as you build your business? You mentioned that you didn't see yourself as a great marketer. What besides marketing is holding your business back?
Probably the fact that I've been very unique in what I offer. There's a lot of people delivering relationship building skills for salespeople, for leaders, for that kind of thing. But in early 1990s, there was only maybe 2 or 3 people doing that. I was one of them. And now, as we transition, we're actually transitioning to a different kind of economy, which I refer to as the wisdom economy. And that white paper is actually downloadable from my LinkedIn site. But the world is beginning to change and leadership is beginning to change. We're tough, we're hard-boiled, we take no prisoners kind of leadership just is not sitting well with the current generation that's now emerging into leaders. They want something more humanistic. And so what I'm doing now is with the wisdom is developing leaders in a really humane way. I'm actually in the midst of writing a book called Leading from Wisdom of the Heart, which talks about empathy, compassion, and a really tough word for most leaders, loving. But they've got loving misunderstood. Most people consider loving to be an emotional response, and you love your wife, you love your significant other, you love your kids, and oftentimes that's an emotional overflow. But doing that as a leader in a large corporation would be a death sentence to most leaders. However, taking care of yourself and taking care of others, serving yourself and serving others, like the servant leadership model, supporting yourself and supporting others. So this kind of loving actually starts from the inside out. Unless you can do that for yourself, if you try to do it for another person, you're doing it from an empty bank account, and it just doesn't work. When you really do it from yourself, from who you are, and you discover who you are, you have that self-awareness of who you are, the ripple effect is amazing. It engages people to be part of the process. It causes people to start looking at themselves and figure out what their key pieces are, and then it just flows out from there. And so there's a lot of courses out there, how to develop executive presence. Well, executive presence is developed from the inside out. It's not based on what you wear, not based on what you do. It's who you are. So we're moving from doing leadership to being a leader. And being a leader, or leadership of being, is what transcendent leadership is all about. But if you start with the wisdom model and then move up to transcendent leadership, it's a whole different game.
So you've stimulated the interest among our leaders. So now, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you? You mentioned LinkedIn, you mentioned the white paper that's downloadable. So why don't you go through the various ways people can get a hold of you, Greg?
The easiest way is to just do it from my website, peoplesavvy.com, and there's a link so people can reach out for me. Or you could download any of the articles I've written for Forbes, or you could buy 3 of the books I have on the market: People Savvy for Salespeople, People Savvy for Leaders, Transcendent Leadership. So those are all ways to find out more about who I am. But probably the best way is send me a LinkedIn message or send me a message through my website.
Okay, so your LinkedIn profile is what?
It ends in Greg Stebbins. So if you do a search on Greg Stebbins, you'll find 2 or 3 of us out there. But the company that I have, People Savvy Inc., is located in Austin, but we're not in Austin. It's just
Okay, good.
Texas corporation is a lot easier to handle than some of the other states.
Yeah, Indiana. My company is in Wyoming for similar reasons, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Greg, what's the one question that maybe I should have thought of and didn't, that would give great value to our audience if they knew both the question and the answer?
How many leaders have you worked with that are really willing to go through the process. And I would say about 60 to 70% of them. 30% of the people that look at it and go, this wisdom stuff is not easy. I said, no, it's simple, but it's not easy, because you really got to take a look at yourself, your beliefs, and your values, and your attitudes about stuff. And when you dive into your beliefs, there's a guy named Morris Massey who talked about the stages of development. From 0 to 7 years old, you go through an imprinting stage. That's where your parents tell you things, your school tells you things, whatever religious institution you're involved in tells you things. And then from about 7 or 8 years old to about 13 years old, you go through a modeling process. That's where you become more aware of the outside world and start emulating the outside world. So if there's people next door working on their property, you may take out a hammer and bang on the dining room table. Not all modeling efforts are successful. Your parents want you to have some culture, so they take you to an art gallery. You look for your box of 64 Crayolas and for a blank canvas, usually the dining room wall. And like I said, not all modeling efforts are successful. Then from about 13 to 21, you go through an adjustment period where you've learned a lot from the outside world and your value systems and beliefs begin to shift. I can usually tell when I have parents in a seminar that have kids of that age, they're missing large chunks of hair. And then from about 21 on, you go through a process where the only thing that really changes is a significant emotional event. Getting married, starting a business, getting fired, anything that brings up a lot of emotions will cause a person to reorder their value system. The thing about value systems is, and this is really interesting, is that you can have two people have similar value systems, but they define it differently. So one group of guys I was working with, these two guys that were in the same business in a small town, they decided to combine businesses. And I had them talk about their values. One guy had honesty and integrity at the top of his value system. The other guy had making money at the top of his value system. And I told him, I said, look, you guys are headed for a conflict. Yeah, and you're not going to like it, and there's no resolution to it. I said, we don't believe you. So this deal pops up. And one guy says, I'm not going to sacrifice my values for that deal. And the other guy goes, are you crazy? Look at all the money we could make. And they never came to a conclusion with that. They finally broke apart and had separate businesses again. But it was a values conflict. Everything else was perfect for them.
Excellent. That's an interesting, you snuck in an extra story. That was nice. Yeah, it was great talking to you, sir. In closing, everybody, let's focus on the single fact, and that is this. Businesses do not become extraordinary in a single instant. Instead, they get there as a result of the owner first creating a visionary strategy, second, adopting a management system to execute that strategy, and number three, leveraging high performance teams. Now, you can get your hands on how to do exactly that. Just go to my YouTube channel, which is at Business Mastery Pro, and you'll get those all for free, plus many other resources. Thanks for listening, Greg. Thanks for sharing your time with us today.
My pleasure. Best of luck to you. This is a great interview.